Welcome to the Nocturne Gallery. Today we're stepping into a real cold case, 400 years old, involving one of art history's most brilliant and, well, volatile figures, Caravaggio.
Michelangelo Maurici de Caravaggio. I mean, a genius who completely changed painting, but also someone who was constantly finding trouble.
Right, constantly. We're talking brawls, arrests. He even murdered a man in 1606, a wanted man, basically.
And then July 1610, he's only 39, and poof, he vanishes near Rome.
Vanishes. No official death record, no body found. For centuries, it's just been speculation, hasn't it? Was he murdered? Did he just die alone somewhere?
Exactly. And that's what we're looking into today, this pretty incredible investigation from 2009 that used forensic science anthropology, trying to finally pin down what happened.
And not just where he died, but, as I understand it, how his own art might have been, well, indirectly responsible.
That's the fascinating twist. Our mission here is to unpack that science.
Okay, the ultimate artistic irony.
Yeah.
So this huge forensic effort. Yeah. Where did they even begin? I mean, 4 centuries later, there's no crime scene tape.
No, definitely not. They started in Porto Ercole, this port town in Tuscany. That's where rumor always said he died. The investigation, led by historian Silvano Vincetti, had this new hypothesis.
A new angle.
Yeah. The initial hope was pinned on this local legend. Apparently, some remains were found back in 1956, and they were supposedly covered by a shroud with a Maltese cross.
Ah, the Maltese cross. Because he became a Knight of Malta towards the end, right? That sounds almost too good to be true for investigators. A direct clue.
It did, but you know how history is. It wasn't quite that simple.
Let me guess. Roadblocks.
Immediately, they hit this wall of, let's call it historical secrecy. The local priest, whose church archives might have held records of the remains being moved, he refused access. Flat out said Caravaggio wasn't there.
Okay, so the church archive is a dead end. What else?
They tried technology, ground-penetrating radar at another potential site, this fortress called Forte Filippo. Also nothing, just silence.
Wow. So paper trail fails, tech fails. That must have been pretty discouraging. How do you even recover from that?
Well, the real breakthrough didn't come from documents or machines. It came from human memory.
Someone remembered something from decades ago.
Exactly. The investigators managed to track down this elderly man who'd been a gravedigger in the town back in 1956.
No way.
Yes, and he gave them the crucial piece of the puzzle. He recalled that when those old bones were dug up from the original St. Sebastian Church cemetery, they weren't carefully reburied.
Oh dear. What happened to them?
They were basically just dumped into a common crypt, an ossuary at the main city cemetery, mixed in with countless other ancient bones.
A common crypt. So the challenge just exploded, didn't it?
Yep.
From finding a grave to finding one specific man from 1610, mixed in with potentially thousands of others over who knows how many years.
Precisely. A literal mountain of history. That's where the modern science really had to take over.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. How on earth do you isolate one person in that kind of jumble?
Well, they had to narrow the field scientifically. The first step was location, location, location. They knew where he should have been buried originally, that old St. Sebastian cemetery right by the sea.
Because that's where foreigners were typically buried back then.
Right, between about 1590 and 1627. So the thinking was, if they couldn't trust the records, maybe the bones themselves held a clue about their original location.
Making the bones talk? So what do they use?
Geochemical analysis. Basically, they looked at the soil still clinging to the bones found in that common crypt.
And compared it to?
To soil samples taken from the site of the old coastal cemetery. They were looking for specific markers, tiny bits of shell, certain types of sand, things you'd only find right near the sea.
Ah, clever. Using soil science to geographically tag the remains. Did it work?
It did. It confirmed that some of the bones in that crypt had definitely come from the coastal burial ground.
That's brilliant. So how much did that narrow it down?
Dramatically. Suddenly, they were looking at fewer than 20 sets of remains instead of thousands.
Okay, less than 20. Still a lot, but manageable. What next? Sorting them out.
Exactly. Now, the standard forensic anthropology kicked in. They determined gender, estimated height, and crucially, used radiocarbon dating.
To confirm the time period.
Yep, to make sure they were dealing with burials from the early 17th century, Caravaggio's time.
And what about age? He was around 39 or 40.
That's where histological analysis came in. It involves looking at the microscopic structure of the bone itself. It's surprisingly accurate for estimating age at death, even after centuries.
Wow, so layer upon layer of scientific filtering. What was the result?
It whittled that list of potentials right down to just 9 candidates.
9. Getting closer.
And among those 9, one stood out. Sample number 5.
Example number 5. What was special about
It
it?
was a perfect match on paper. Male. Died around age 40. And the radiocarbon dating placed the burial squarely in the early 1600s. They were pretty confident they had their man.
Incredible. So they find the bones. But that just brings us back to the original question, doesn't it? What actually killed him? The old theories were fever, maybe malaria, or maybe a wound finally got infected.
Oh, right. But the analysis of sample number 5 revealed something unexpected, something deeply connected to his work as an artist.
Okay.
The bones showed extremely high levels of lead.
Lead from his paints.
Exactly. You have to remember, before the 20th century, paints were loaded with toxic stuff. Lead, mercury. Caravaggio would have been using lead white pigments constantly. It was essential for that dramatic light and shadow, his tenebrism.
Lead white.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just how high were these levels after 400 years?
Staggering, really. Sample number 5 had lead levels 3 to 4 times higher than the other remains they tested from that same crypt.
3 to 4 times higher. What does that mean in numbers?
We're talking around 20 milligrams per kilogram of bone. Now, people back then had higher background lead levels than we do today, from pipes, cookware. But 20 milligram is way beyond normal. It's the kind of level you'd only really expect to see in someone who spent years, decades, in constant close contact with lead compounds.
Like a painter. Especially a prolific one like Caravaggio.
Precisely. He painted something like 100 canvases in just 18 years. He was practically bathing in this stuff.
So the lead was literally building up in his system. How did it get in? I mean, he wasn't drinking the paint, was he?
Probably not drinking it, no, but there are several ways. Absorption through the skin, especially if you had cuts or sores. Inhaling dust and fumes in a poorly ventilated studio.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then there's the rather grim possibility. Some historians mention painters having a habit of licking their brushes to get a fine point, or tasting pigments. Or, even more disturbingly, the theory that Caravaggio, who was often poor and on the run, might have eaten food directly off the back of his canvases.
Eating off the canvas, which would often be primed with lead paint.
Exactly. It's a horrifying thought, but it fits the picture.
And connecting this back to his life, his infamous temper, the violence. Could the lead explain that?
It really could. Chronic lead poisoning, or plumism, has well-known symptoms. Dizziness, yes, insomnia, paranoia, but also extreme irritability, aggression, even seizures.
Wow. It sort of reframes everything, doesn't it? All those street fights, the carrying weapons, being arrested again and again.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't just a fiery personality. Maybe it was chemistry.
That's the compelling argument. It suggests his volatile behavior might have been significantly exacerbated, if not partly caused, by the toxic materials he worked with.
You can almost see it. Some art historians even think his later self-portraits show signs, like a grayish, leaden skin tone, maybe even that blue line on the gums associated with lead poisoning.
It's plausible his art defined him, but the tools of his art may have literally poisoned him, affecting his behavior and ultimately contributing to his death.
Let's go back to those final days in 1610. He was desperate, right? Trying to get a pardon from the Pope via Cardinal Borghese.
Desperate is the word. He was heading towards Rome carrying several incredibly valuable paintings. These weren't just art. They were meant to be his payment, his bargaining chip for freedom from that murder charge.
His ticket out.
Yeah.
But something went wrong near Rome.
Yes, in a place called Palo. He gets arrested, probably a case of mistaken identity or some bureaucratic mix-up.
And while he's stuck,
The ship, carrying his paintings, his entire hope for a pardon, just sails off without him.
oh no, that's brutal.
Absolutely devastating. Once he's released, he's frantic. He apparently runs along the coast trying to chase the ship down, trying to get his paintings back. It's this final, desperate effort.
You can just imagine the state he must have been in. Exhausted, probably sick. He eventually makes it to Porto Ercole.
Staggering into town, yes. Likely feverish, completely depleted.
So, putting the lead poisoning theory together with this final journey, what does the science suggest actually happened in Porto Ercole? Was it just exhaustion, or did that old wound theory play a part?
The current scientific consensus, based on the lead levels weakening his system, points towards infection as the final straw. The chronic lead poisoning would have hammered his immune system over years.
Making him incredibly vulnerable.
Exactly. So while people used to think maybe it was a wound from that fight in Naples the year before that killed him, it's more likely that any infection, maybe malaria, maybe sepsis from a minor wound, even just a severe fever, could have overwhelmed his compromised system. The lay didn't kill him outright, perhaps, but it left him unable to fight off whatever final illness struck him down.
And if we think about the context he dies, his valuable paintings are nearby. Why the silence? Why no official record?
Well, the investigation pointed towards a possible cover-up. Puerto Roncoli was under Spanish control then.
Okay.
And those paintings were hugely valuable. The theory is the Spanish authorities might have deliberately kept his death quiet, maybe even confiscated the paintings themselves. Hushing it up would make seizing the art much easier. It explains why such a famous person's death just wasn't recorded.
That adds another layer of tragedy.
Okay.
So they have sample 5, they have the lead evidence, the context fits, but they needed definitive proof, right? DNA.
Yes, the final confirmation. And that was arguably the hardest part. Getting usable DNA from 400-year-old bones that have been moved, mixed up, it's incredibly challenging.
Ancient DNA is notoriously difficult, degraded, contaminated.
Absolutely. But they tackled it. The goal was to compare the DNA from sample 5 to living people who might be related.
How did they find potential relatives?
They focused on people with the surname Merisi, that was Caravaggio's actual family name, living in the regions around Milan and Bergamo, where his family originated.
Looking for a genetic link down the male line.
Precisely. They used Y chromosome analysis, comparing specific markers passed down almost unchanged from father to son across generations.
And did they find a match after all that?
They did. After a lot of work refining the techniques for this ancient damaged DNA, they got a match on 11 out of 17 Y chromosome markers between sample 5 and the modern races.
11 out of 17. Is that conclusive?
With ancient DNA, a perfect match is virtually impossible. But 11 out of 17 is considered a very strong indicator, especially when you combine it with all the other evidence.
So the age, the burial location near the sea, the time period, those incredibly high lead levels, and now this strong genetic similarity.
Exactly. The convergence of all those independent lines of evidence convinced the research team. They felt they had finally solved it. Sample number 5 was Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio.
Wow. So, summing it all up, Caravaggio's dramatic life didn't just end because of a knife fight or bad luck. It was a slow burn, wasn't it? A poisoning brought on by the very materials that allowed him to create such powerful art.
That seems to be the conclusion. His legacy isn't just about the chiaroscuro, the light and shadow that changed art forever. It's also about this incredibly complex and tragic end finally revealed by science. The stuff that made his masterpieces also ultimately killed him.
It really makes you think. Here's a final thought for you listening. Artists for centuries worked with incredibly toxic materials: lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium. Think about Van Gogh, Goya, maybe others we don't even suspect. How many creative minds throughout history might have had their personalities, their struggles, even their fates, shaped or accelerated by the very act of creation? Something to ponder. Thank you for joining this discussion.